Gambling. Billboards love gambling. Sports franchises love gambling. The App Store loves gambling too. But it doesn't love games that look like gambling. Here's the situation. In January 2025, Google Play tried to block the game Luck Be a Landlord globally for featuring gambling. Except it doesn't. Luck Be a Landlord is a roguelite deck builder that you can buy for a one-time purchase of $4.99 or $9.99 on Steam. In it, the player takes spins on a slot machine to earn their ever-increasing rent, a nightmare gamification of our day-to-day grind to remain housed. On the Play Store page, developer Dan Diorio notes, "This game does not contain any real-world currency gambling or microtransactions." But for Google, that didn't matter. First, the game was removed from the storefront in a slew of countries that have strict gambling laws. Then, at the beginning of 2025, Google told Diorio that Luck Be a Landlord would be pulled globally because its rating, quote-unquote, does not take into account references to gambling, including real or simulated gambling. Diorio had gone through this song and dance before. Previously, when the game was blocked, he would send back a message saying, "Hey, the game doesn't have gambling," and then Google would send back a screenshot of the game and be like, "Looks like gambling to me." Diorio didn't agree, but eventually decided that the risk of Landlord getting taken down permanently was too great. They're a solo developer, and Luck Be a Landlord had just had its highest 30-day revenue since release. So they filled out the form confirming that Luck Be a Landlord has gambling themes, and are currently hoping that this will be the end of it. This is a situation that sucks for an indie dev to be in, and over email, Diorio told me it was very frustrating. They said, "I think it can negatively affect indie developers if they fall outside the norm, which indies often do. It makes me afraid to explore mechanics like this further. It stifles creativity, and that's really upsetting." Hot off winning a million awards, including Polygon's Game of the Year 2024, Balatro's publisher got a nasty surprise: an adult rating in Europe's PEGI system. The ESRB had already rated it E10+ in the US, noting that it has the dreaded gambling themes. And the game was already out in Europe, making its overnight ratings change a surprise. Publisher Playstack said they were told the rating was given because Balatro has prominent gambling imagery and material that instructs about gambling. Balatro is basically Luck Be a Landlord's little cousin, who got very, very big. Developer Local Thunk was inspired by Landlord's deck building. But here, instead of adding symbols to a slot machine, you're adding a whole lot of game-altering bullshit to your deck of cards. Like Luck Be a Landlord, Balatro is a one-time purchase with no microtransactions. But the PEGI board noted that because the game uses poker hands, the skills you learn in Balatro could translate to real-world poker. Yeah, I fucking wish. In their write-up, GameSpot noted that the same thing had happened to a game called Sunshine Shuffle. It was temporarily banned from the Nintendo eShop and also the entire country of South Korea. Unlike Balatro, Sunshine Shuffle actually is a poker game, except you're playing Texas Hold'em, again for no real money, with cute animals, who are all bank robbers. And you can decorate their boat! All of this begs the question, what is gambling? Is it playing any game that is also played in casinos, like poker or blackjack? Is it playing a game that evokes the aesthetics of a casino, like cards, chips, dice, or slot machines? Is it wagering or earning fictional money? Gaming has always been a lightning rod for controversy. Sex, violence, misogyny, addiction, you name it, video games have been accused of perpetrating or encouraging it. But gambling is gaming's original sin, and it's the one we still can't get a grip on. The association between video games and gambling all goes back to pinball.
New York City completes a roundup of thousands of pinball machines, each valued at about $100. The police acted on a city magistrate's decision, which classified them as gambling devices.
Early pinball machines were less skill-based, they didn't even have flippers, and some did give cash payouts, so the comparison wasn't totally unfair. Although it is still nuts that New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia banned pinball in the city and dumped a bunch of pinball and slot machines into the Long Island Sound. Why'd you do that? Pinball machines spent some time relegated to the back rooms of sex shops and dive bars. But after some lobbying, including a really wild Hail Mary play from a pinball whiz, which you should seriously look up, pinball was legal countrywide. By the 1970s, pinball manufacturers were also making video games, and the machines were side by side in arcades. Arcade machines, like pinball, took small coin payments repeatedly for short rounds of play. The disreputable funk of pinball basically rubbed off onto video games. I guess they did learn something from those sex shops. Stupid joke. Ever since video games rocked onto the scene, concerned and sometimes uneducated parties have been asking if they're dangerous. And in general, studies have shown that they're not. But gambling can be. The commonly used definition of gambling, where you're putting real money down to bet on an outcome. 2025 in the USA is a great time for gambling, which has been really profitable for gambling companies, to the tune of $66.5 billion of revenue in 2023. I want to put this number into perspective because the American Gaming Association, which is the casino industry's trade group and nothing to do with video games, reports that 2022's gambling revenue was $60.5 billion. It went up $6 billion in a year, which is the budget of the state of Delaware. They made a whole new Delaware. And this increase is not just because of sportsbooks, although sports betting is a huge part of it. Online casinos and brick-and-mortar casinos are both earning more. And as a lot of people have pointed out, gambling is being normalized to a pretty disturbing degree. Much like with alcohol, for a small percentage of people, gambling can tip from occasional leisure activity into addiction. The people who are most at risk are by and large already vulnerable. Researchers at the Yale School of Medicine found that 96% of problem gamblers are also wrestling with other disorders, such as substance use, impulse control disorders, mood disorders, and anxiety disorders. Even if you're not in that group, there are still good reasons to be wary when you gamble. People tend to underestimate their own vulnerability to things that we know are a problem. Someone else shouldn't drive drunk, but I can make it home okay. Someone else might get inducted into a cult, but it could never happen to me. Someone else might bet beyond their means, but I would simply know when to stop. Maybe you do, but being blithely confident about it can make it hard to notice if you do develop a problem, or if you already have one. Addiction changes the way your brain works. When you're addicted to something, your participation in it becomes compulsive, at the expense of other interests and responsibilities. Someone might turn to their addiction to self-soothe when depressed or anxious. Oh, and speaking of those feelings, people who are depressed and anxious are already more vulnerable to addiction. Which, given the state of the world right now, makes me look at the earnings from the AGA and wonder, is it possible that a nation in turmoil is being taken advantage of by massive corporations? No, couldn't be. That would never happen here. That's crazy. The people who own betting companies are millionaires. Most of the people betting are not. And the people losing are not. The billions of dollars put into gambling are primarily funneling in one direction, and that is up. I say all this as a massive fan of Las Vegas grime and casino aesthetics. I absolutely live for that shit. But it does feel weird to me to see massive billboards promoting sports betting now that it's legal, or to hear sportscasters touting unlikely parlays through gritted teeth during sponsored segments. If you haven't seen it yet, Drew Gooden made a really good video about gambling, and in particular why the current rise of digital gambling is so nefarious. You should definitely watch the video, but one of the main points that he makes is that gambling is more accessible than ever. It's on all of our phones, and betting companies are using decades of well-honed app design and behavioral studies to manipulate users to spend and spend. Meanwhile, advertising on podcasts and billboards and TV and radio and websites, it's literally everywhere, tells you that this is fun, and you don't even need to know what you're doing, and you're probably one bet away from winning back those losses. Wow, that's not good. So, how do gambling themes manifest in Luck Be a Landlord? Well, if they're there, they're mostly abstracted. Luck Be a Landlord's slot machine is represented in simple pixel art. You pay 1 coin to use it, and among the more traditional slot machine symbols are silly ones, like a snail that only pays out after 4 spins. When I started playing it, my primary emotion wasn't necessarily elation at winning coins. It was stress and disbelief when, in the 3rd round of the game, the landlord increased my rent by 100%. What the hell, man? I don't doubt that getting better at it would produce dopamine thrills akin to gambling or playing any video game. But it's supposed to be difficult because that's the joke. If you beat the game, you unlock more difficulty modes, where if you just keep paying your rent, your landlord gets furious and starts throwing bullshit rules at you. Previously rare symbols will give you less of a payout, and the very mechanics of the slot machine change. It's a manifestation of the golden rule of casinos and all of capitalism writ large. The odds are stacked against you, the house always wins. Note that I learned about the late game by watching YouTube videos because I'm not good at Luck Be a Landlord, which, as I've discussed in other videos, go watch them, doesn't mean it's not fun. Thank you very much. There is luck involved, to be sure, but because Luck Be a Landlord is a deck builder, knowing the different ways you can design your slot machine to maximize payouts is a skill. You have some influence over it, unlike a real slot machine. The synergies that I've seen high-level players create are completely nuts, and obviously based on a deep understanding of the strategies that the game allows. Balatro and Luck Be a Landlord both distance themselves from casino gambling again in the way that they treat money. In Landlord, the money that you earn is gold coins, not any currency that we recognize, and the payouts aren't actually that big. By the end of the core game, the rent money you're struggling and scraping to earn is 777 coins. In the post-game endless mode, payouts can get pretty massive. But the thing is, to get here, you can't rely on chance. You have to be very good at Luck Be a Landlord. And in Balatro, the numbers that get big are your points. The actual dollar payments in a round of Balatro are small. Is this gambling themes? Maybe, I don't know. We'll come back to that question later. First, I want to talk about a closer analog to what we colloquially consider gambling: loot boxes and gacha games. Recently, I did something that I haven't done in a really long time. I thought about Overwatch. I used to play Overwatch with my friends, and I absolutely made a habit of dropping 20 bucks here or there for a bunch of seasonal loot boxes. This was never a problem behavior for me, but in hindsight, it sure does sting that over a couple years, I spent maybe 150 bucks on cosmetics for a game that I now primarily associate with squandered potential. Maybe I did have a problem. Loot boxes grew out of free-to-play mobile games. In the latter, they're the primary method of monetization. In something like Overwatch, they functioned as a way to earn additional revenue in an ongoing game, once the player had already dropped 40 bucks to buy it. More often than not, loot boxes are a random selection of skins and other cosmetics. But games like Star Wars Battlefront 2 were famously criticized for launching with loot crates that essentially made it pay to win, if you bought enough of them and got lucky. It's not unrealistic to associate loot boxes with gambling. This 2021 study published in Addictive Behaviors showed that players who self-reported as problem gamblers also tended to spend more on loot boxes. And another study done in the UK found a similar correlation with young adults. While Overwatch certainly wasn't the first game to feature cosmetic loot boxes or microtransactions, it's a reference point for me, and it also got attention worldwide. In 2018, Overwatch was investigated by the Belgian Gaming Commission, who found it in violation of gambling legislation, alongside FIFA 18 and Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Belgium's response was to ban the sale of loot boxes without a gambling license. Having a paid random rewards mechanic in a game is a criminal offense there. Except, not really. This 2023 study showed that 82% of iPhone games sold on the App Store in Belgium still use random paid monetization, as do around 80% of games that are rated 12+. The ban wasn't effectively enforced, if at all, and the study recommended that a blanket ban wouldn't be a practical solution anyway. Overwatch was rated T for Teen by the ESRB and 12 by PEGI. When it first came out, its loot boxes were divisive. Since the mechanic came from free-to-play mobile games, which are often seen as predatory, people balked at seeing it in a big action game from a multi-million-dollar publisher. At the time, the rebuttal was, well, at least it's just cosmetics. Nobody needs to buy loot boxes to be good at Overwatch. A lot has changed since 2016. Now we have a deeper understanding of how these mechanics are designed to manipulate players, even if they don't affect gameplay. But also, They've totally been normalized. While there will always be people expressing disappointment when a AAA game has a paid random loot mechanic, it is no longer shocking. And if anything, these mechanics have only become more prevalent thanks to the growth of gacha games. Gacha is short for gachapon, the Japanese blind box machines where you pay to receive one of a selection of toys. Real-life loot box, but instead of sexy witch Mercy, I'm pulling for Fishing Snoopy.
And I got him. He fits on my mug, and he's perfect.
In gacha games, players pay, not necessarily real money, but we'll get to that, for a chance to get something. Maybe it's a character, or a special weapon, or some gear. It depends on the game. Whatever it is, within that context, it is desirable. And unlike the cosmetics of Overwatch, gacha pulls often do impact the gameplay. For example, in Infinity Nikki, you can pull for clothing items in these limited time events. I have a chance to get pieces of this 5-star outfit. But I also might pull one of these 4-star items, or any of these 3-star pieces. Of course, if I want all 10 pieces of the 5-star outfit, I have to do multiple pulls. And you might be saying, Simone, why do you want the outfit in the first place? I don't know! Why do we want anything in this life? It's miserable out there. I want a pretty dress. Gacha was a fixture of mobile gaming for a long time, but in recent years, we've seen it go AAA and global. MiHoYo's Genshin Impact did a lot of that work when it came out worldwide on consoles and PC alongside its mobile release. Genshin and its successors are, honest to God, massive AAA games of a scale that for your Nintendos and Ubisofts would necessitate selling a bajillion copies to be a success. And they're free. Genshin is a whole-ass action game whose playstyle changes depending on what character you're playing. Characters you get from gacha pulls, of course. In Zenless Zone Zero, the characters you pull have different combo patterns. They do different kinds of damage, and they just feel different to play. And whereas in an early mobile game like Love Nikki Dress Up Queen, the world was pretty rudimentary, its modern descendant, Infinity Nikki, is, much like Genshin Impact, Breath of the Wild-esque. It is my new Elden Ring. There is so much to explore and collect. There are physics puzzles and platforming challenges and a surprisingly involved storyline.
They won't let you join. That is the cruel truth.
You all, you're making fun of me and my wishes, aren't you?
Genshin Impact was the subject of an interesting study where researchers asked young adults in Hong Kong to self-report on their gacha spending habits. The researchers found that, like with gambling, players who are not feeling good tend to spend more. Young adult gacha gamers experiencing greater stress and anxiety tend to spend more on gacha purchases, have more motives for gacha purchase, and participate in more gambling activities. This group is at a particularly higher risk of becoming problem gamblers. One wrinkle, I would say, is that Genshin Impact came out in 2020. The study was self-reported, and it was done during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. People were experiencing a lot of stress, and also fewer options to relieve that stress. We were all stuck inside gaming. Or in my case, dissociating while thinking about the first season of AMC's critically acclaimed anthology series, The Terror, now streaming on Netflix. But anyway, to wrinkle this argument even further, the fact that a stressful environment could make people more likely to spend money on gacha shows that while the gacha model isn't necessarily harmful to everyone, it is exploitative to everyone. In the time between me writing this script and editing the video, another self-reported study came out in Japan that said that 18.8% of people in their 20s say that they've spent money on gacha rather than on things like, food or rent. So that's probably fine. Following Genshin Impact's release, MiHoYo put out Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero, both shiny, big-budget games that are free to play. But maybe just this month I'll chip in $10 and get Nameless Glory so I can access the second tier of rewards in this Nameless Honor period. And 680 Stellar Jade. Surely I've enjoyed $10 worth of gameplay.
Simone deserves Stellar Jade.
Every one of these gacha games has its own tangled system of overlapping currencies. Some can only be used on gacha pulls. Some can only be used to upgrade items. Most of them can be purchased with real human money. All of this adds up. According to Sensor Tower's data, Genshin Impact earned over $36 million on mobile alone in a single month last year. I don't know what Dan DiOrio's peak monthly revenue for Luck Be a Landlord was, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't that. It's important that you know that I'm not coming at this conversation from a holier-than-thou place. I am coming from a place of opening Infinity Nikki first thing in the morning so that I can fulfill my daily wishes, so I can earn my XP, diamonds, threads of purity, and bling. I haven't spent money on the game. I'm trying not to, and so far it's actually been really easy. I've been super happy with how much stuff I can get for free and how much I can do. It's actually incredibly good about that, which is what I said to my boyfriend, who replied, "Yeah, that's the point. That's how they get you." Anyway, a lot of the spending guardrails that we see in games like these are actually the result of regulations in other territories, especially China, where gacha has been a very big deal for a lot longer. For example, gacha games have a daily limit on loot boxes, with the number clearly displayed, and a system collectively called pity, where getting the banner item is guaranteed after a certain number of pulls. Lastly, developers have to be clear about what the odds are. When I log in to spend the revelation crystals that I've spent weeks hoarding in my free-to-play Infinity Nikki experience, I know that I have a 1.5% chance of pulling a 5-star piece, and the odds can go up to 6.06, and that I am guaranteed to get one within 20 pulls because of the pity system. So these odds are truly awful, but it is not as merciless as sitting down at a Vegas slot machine, an experience best described as, oh, that's it? There's not a huge philosophical difference between buying a pack of loot boxes in Overwatch, a pull in Genshin Impact, or even a sleeve of Pokemon cards. You put in money, you get back randomized stuff that may or may not be what you want. In the dictionary definition, it's a gamble. But since even a game where you don't get anything, like Balatro or Luck Be a Landlord, can come under fire for promoting gambling to kids, it's good that gacha games are rated appropriately in the App Store. They're all T for teen and PEGI 12 in the EU. Oh, the ESRB ratings for these games note that they contain in-game purchases, including random items. Honkai Star Rail's rating specifically calls out a slot machine mechanic, where players spend tokens to win a prize. They don't even mention Infinity Nikki's Scam-O-Matic! But other than calling out Honkai's slot machine, app stores are not slapping Genshin or Nikki with an 18+ rating. Meanwhile, Balatro was 18 in the PEGI system until a successful appeal in February 2025, and Luck Be a Landlord is still 17+ on Apple's App Store. Nobody really knows what they're doing! When I started researching this video, I felt very strongly that it was bullshit that Luck Be a Landlord and Balatro had age ratings this high. I still believe that the way both devs have been treated by ratings boards is bad. Threatening an indie dev with a significant loss of income by pulling their game is bad. Not giving them a way to defend themselves or help them understand why it's happening is bad. It's an extension of the general way that too big to fail companies like Google treat all of their customers. Diorio told me that while it felt like a human being had at least looked at Luck Be a Landlord to make the determination that it contained gambling themes, the emails he was getting were automatic, and he doesn't have a contact at Google to ask why this happened or how he can avoid it in the future, an experience that will be familiar to anyone who has ever needed Google support. But what's changed for me is that I'm not actually sure anymore that games that don't have gambling should be completely let off the hook for evoking gambling, if that makes sense. This study showed that exposing teens to simulated gambling without financial stakes could still spark an interest in the real thing later on. It's the same reason you can't mosey on down to the drugstore to buy candy cigarettes anymore. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but multiple studies were done that show that kids who ate candy cigarettes were more likely to take up smoking. We're dumb. So, while I think rating these games so high is nuts, I do think that describing them appropriately is probably reasonable. For example, as a game, Balatro is completely divorced from any kind of play you would find in a casino. Seriously, get me one of these jokers IRL. But I can see the concern that the thrill of flashy numbers and shiny cards might encourage young players to try their hand at poker in a real casino where a real house can take their real money. So yeah, I think what happened to these games is bullshit, but it's probably not a bad idea to think about this stuff because, like I said, we're dumb. Maybe what's more important than doling out high age ratings is helping people think about how media affects us. In the same way that when I was 12 and obsessed with The Matrix, my parents gently made sure that I knew that none of the violence was real and you can't actually cartwheel through a hail of bullets in real life, I guess. But that's an answer that's a lot more abstract and difficult to implement than a big red 18+ banner. When it comes to gacha, I think we're even less equipped to talk about these game mechanics, and I am certain they're not being age-rated appropriately. Imagine your parents trying to explain this. On the one hand, like I said earlier, gacha exploits the player's desire for stuff that they are heavily manipulated to buy with real money. On the other hand, I think it's worth acknowledging that there is a difference between gacha and casino gambling. Problem gamblers aren't satisfied by winning. The thing they're addicted to is playing and the risk that comes with it. In gacha games, players do report satisfaction when they achieve the prize that they set out to get. And yes, the game's next season, the developer will be dangling a shiny new prize in front of them with the goal of starting that cycle over. But there is a material difference between the business model of saying, spend all your money and maybe get something or lose it all, whatever, and the business model of spend all your money and eventually you will get what you want. So, gacha isn't gambling, but it's gambling-like. I do think we can make that distinction while still being critical of the model. And right now, there is close to no incentive for app stores to crack down on gacha in any way. They get a cut of in-app purchases. Back in 2023, MiHoYo tried a couple of times to set up payment systems that circumvent Apple's 30% cut of in-app spending. Both times it was thwarted by Apple, whose App Store generated $1.1 trillion in developer billings and sales in 2022. According to Apple itself, 90% of that money did not include commission to Apple, but 10% of $1 trillion is still $100 billion, so that's nice. I'd like a cut of that too. Apple has zero reason to curb spending in a game that is again earning $7 million. $8 million, $9 million. And despite the popularity of Luck Be a Landlord and Balatro's massive App Store success, these games will never be as lucrative because they're one-time purchases that don't have microtransactions. To add insult to injury, like most popular games, Luck Be a Landlord has a lot of clones. And from what I can tell, it doesn't look like any of them have been made to indicate that their games contain the dreaded gambling themes that Google was so worried about in Landlord. In particular, a game called Spincraft Roguelike from Sneaky Panda Games raised $6 million in seed funding for inventing the luck puzzler genre, which it introduced in 2022, while Luck Be a Landlord went early access in 2021. It's free to play, it has ads and in-app purchases, it looks like Fisher-Price made a slot machine, and it's rated E for everyone, with no mention of gambling imagery in its rating. I tried reaching out to the developers to ask if they had also been contacted by the Play Store to disclose that their game has gambling themes, but I didn't hear back. Borrowing mechanics in games is as old as time, and it's something I in no way want to imply shouldn't happen because copyright is the killer of invention, but I think we can all agree this feels unfair. Even more so when you're getting $6 million in funding while claiming to have invented a genre that already exists. Annoying. There is no consistency in how games with random chance are treated. We still do not know how to talk about gambling or gambling themes, and at the end of the day, the results of this are the same. The house always wins. Pa-pa-pa-pa-pa. I'll do the sex shop joke. How was that? Clearing my throat. Sippy time. Time for a sippy. It's the same reason you can't mosey on down to the drugstore to buy... I spit all over my face. I did it! Yay!